Welcome to Impact TV, a video series showcasing the top corporate venture groups in the world. My name is Jack Crawford. I'm a general partner at Impact Venture Capital, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Jonathan Charles, JC, from Samsung Ventures today. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi. How's it going?
Pretty good. Hey, thanks for making time. You and I got a chance to connect during the Kauffman Fellows program. I know that was an incredible program for me. In addition to leadership training, the opportunity to see entrepreneurs and venture capitalists operating in ecosystems around the world. My class went, as you may recall, to Beijing and Shanghai and spent a lot of time in New York and Austin and, of course, Silicon Valley. Where did you guys get a chance to travel to?
Yeah, we actually ended up going to London, which was really awesome, and also Israel.
Okay. And does that have a positive impact on your professional development and career at Samsung? And did it just expand your network of global relationships? What was the impact value proposition for you from the Kauffman Fellows program?
Yeah, I'd say, Jack, probably two things across different dimensions. So the first one was a lot of introspective thinking. So thinking about, who am I as a venture capitalist? Where am I today? What kind of trajectory do I need to be on to get to the path that I want to go to when you think about a venture capital career over a couple of decades? The other dimension, of course, is the Kauffman network. So, I think there's over 600 or 700 fellows now going back a couple of decades, and they're global, like you kind of mentioned, right? So all over the world, my network is really throttled up. And as a part of that network, my own class, we're really tight. We have a WhatsApp group channel that, a lot of us use probably a couple times a week, where we kind of ask each other questions and look for leads and answers. And we really support one another, which is fantastic.
And remind the audience of entrepreneurs, both those that watch this later and the live audience that we have here today, where you're located, where are you headquartered now?
Yeah, I'm with the headquarters of the Samsung Catalyst Fund in Menlo Park, California. We're actually run out of this office, but of course we have offices around the world. We have an office in New York, in Paris, in Israel, and of course, we have a team at headquarters for Samsung Electronics in Seoul, Korea.
And so I saw a little bit of your focuses on automotive and sort of the connected car space. Have you figured out a solution for traffic in Menlo Park and San Francisco and the whole Bay Area? Or?
Yeah, I wish. A couple of startups are working on this kind of thing. To avoid that traffic, perhaps in the future, and we've seen this in some sci-fi movies, you might just have to fly over it. And certainly there are startups that are working on that.
Sure. Well, for those who aren't familiar with Samsung's venture capital activities, can you just talk a little bit about the corporate priorities and the investment thesis for your activities as an investor on behalf of Samsung?
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so Samsung has three venture capital funds. The Samsung Catalyst Fund, where I work, is one of them. So I know we've got a short interview today, so I'll just focus on that. Samsung Catalyst Fund does two things. Like most traditional corporate venture capitalists, will of course support the business units through investing in things that are considered core or deep tech, sensors, chips, really in the weeds sort of deep technology, sort of often called components kind of things. And more than happy to do that in support of the business units. But the Samsung Catalyst Fund also reports to the Chief Strategy Officer of Samsung Electronics. President Young Sohn, who is the CSO, part of his job is to think about the future for Samsung. And as a part of that, we focus on what we call as new business creation. What are the areas that Samsung may not be playing in today, but in the future, it might be more relevant? So things like digital health, fintech, insurtech, mobility services. There's a whole slew of areas that are entirely new to Samsung, which we try to invest around with our startup partners.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. From the standpoint of corporate venture, what's been amazing to us as an early stage venture capital firm is the rise of corporate venture in the last few years. I've moderated panels for corporate venture symposiums where maybe 4 or 5 years ago there was 50 or so of the Fortune 500 that have corporate venture arms that were actively investing in the U.S. and actually many of them globally. Now you're going back to the same conferences and there's 450 corporate venture groups. Corporate venture now represents sort of 1/3 of all venture capital investing. And of course, people are familiar with Intel Capital and with Google Ventures, and maybe some are familiar with Samsung Ventures. What's your view on sort of this trend around corporate venture? It seems like it's a bit more of a sustainable market trend than maybe years past.
Yeah, I think the big difference is the corporations are becoming much more thoughtful about how to deploy, and staff and deploy, I would say, their corporate venture capital teams, and really kind of thinking through a development of their overall strategy and then, sector theses. And I remember back in the day around the dot-com days where there was also somewhat of an explosion of corporate venture capital, a lot of that sort of vaporized with an economic downturn. I think the difference is, there's been a couple of cycles of this now, and a lot of teams have seen the ups and downs, and therefore they become more sustainable over time. It is really interesting that about a third of, all the activity is now related to corporate venture capital. I actually looked up some of the data, and in the early days, it was pretty low, and it kind of peaked at about 10, 11% for a long time, but now it's triple that. And, how far up that goes, remains to be seen. But I have high hopes that the teams, as they increasingly professionalize, they'll have really good opportunities to create value hand in hand with their startup partners.
Well, one of the things that we enjoy as an early stage venture capital firm is learning from the corporate venture groups. Sort of where are you researching, where are the problem areas, where are the priorities, where will you be investing, and candidly, where will you be acquiring companies in the next 5, 6, 7 years, because that informs our investment map, right? We sort of feel like by having conversations like this, we're elevating our own investing IQ. Do you have any professional advice for me and other angel investors, other venture firms on how best to sort of collaborate or think about the information exchange or communications with groups like yours within Samsung?
Yeah, I think there's no. I think it's pretty straightforward. Number one is just reach out, right? So even though some of these companies are very large and they may have multiple innovation teams, or in the case of Samsung, we actually have multiple venture capital teams. Step number one is just to reach out and, grab a cup of coffee, go through what your kind of strategy and thesis is, and then have the corporate person that you're talking to do the same. And often is the case that there might actually be some overlap that was not initially sort of predicted. And we're pleasantly surprised to find that, many VCs love spending time with us so they can better understand such a large, IT company that has such a global footprint. And more often than not, there actually is some overlap where we can potentially do something together.
Are you required to have business unit sponsorship prior to making investments? Are there 2 or 3 business units within Samsung that you're working a little bit closer with? Maybe you could just speak to kind of your internal process as you look at, making new investment decisions.
Sure. Our, the formal model is what you kind of described, where some corporate venture capital team might get an idea to invest around from the business unit, or they themselves might come up with that idea and then sort of try to, sell it to the business unit. Samsung Catalyst Fund is a little bit different. So because, particularly around the new business creation that I described, what does the future of Samsung look like? And the CSO is thinking about this, and we go and invest around it. We can actually come up with new whole sector theses, and we can go after it without business unit direct approval. So the case in point here is a couple of years ago, when autonomous driving sort of, was kind of becoming a thing, we actually worked on a thesis for the space, and we started investing in hardware companies in the area. Then we started doing a little bit of software companies. We got to know all the venture investors in the area, even the OEMs, Ford, GM, Daimler, big companies like that. And next thing you know, that sort of influenced the acquisition we made of Harman, and now Samsung is also a tier 1 automotive supplier. So earlier when you were describing the question, I heard you talk about, invest and learn. So that was kind of a classic case where through investing in the most innovative entrepreneurs and then interfacing with all the people around them, so everybody from the OEMs to, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, and even, individual engineers at various companies, we actually learned a whole lot, and we got really smart really fast, and that led to a close to $10 billion acquisition.
Yeah, I've seen this pattern of corporate venture groups effectively crowdsourcing R&D and crowdsourcing an education from outside their 4 walls and informing their priorities and their investment decisions going forward. So it's really interesting to hear further validation of that strategy. One of the things that we're focused on, and it'd be interesting to hear you comment on, is artificial intelligence. I mean, 25 years ago when sort of the internet was just starting to sort of take off, I think that there was a lot of people that viewed it as an individual technology sector, and we know now that the internet isn't one technology. It impacts every sector, every market. We feel that artificial intelligence is sort of at that same stage where some are viewing it as an individual industry sector, but our view is pattern recognition in a globally connected world with massive amounts of content being uploaded in every industry sector is going to inform decision making by consumers, by businesses, by government, by education, everywhere. And so we have a particular thesis around AI as it applies to various market opportunities. And now we've built out a portfolio of 14 companies that effectively adhere to that thesis. How are you thinking about AI, and sort of are there industry sectors that you're particularly excited about as we head here into 2020?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. And really a broad topic, as you kind of alluded to. So we started a couple of years ago thinking about the first of the two areas that we invest in. So, we could call it supporting the business unit through the investment in deep technology, and then new business creation, the new areas for Samsung. So on the former, we had actually made a whole bunch of investments in what you can call AI infrastructure. So companies like GraphCore, Habana, Sambanova, really in the weeds, deep technologies that allow for AI applications to ultimately run on top. And now, since we've had great successes in that area, we're now thinking like, okay, now if we think about the future of a big company like Samsung, where we work, and the applications, what industries are disrupted by precisely what you were talking about, which is all this data. And then you apply AI to the data. So now we're thinking about areas like fintech, insurtech, more advanced applications of digital health that involve AI. It could be mobility services. So, we're really excited to be moving up the stack, as they say. Not to say that we'll leave the infrastructure behind, because at the end of the day, we're experts in that for sure. Samsung builds a lot of very deep technology things, but we're also looking forward to learning more about the use of data and AI for the sectors I mentioned and even beyond.
I wanted to ask you about something else that I know you're working on. We've done a little bit of research. Obviously, we're enamored with this idea of taking technology and entrepreneurship and positively impacting the world, right? Using technology to have a genuine impact on some of the world's largest problems. So much so that we named our firm Impact Venture Capital, right? You are working on playing a leadership role and a significant partner on behalf of Samsung in the Extreme Tech Challenge. And we got a chance to do a little bit of research, and we're fascinated by this idea of Samsung and a group of pretty significant partners coming together to address the world's problems with technology. Can you speak a little bit more about, for those who haven't heard of it and don't know much about it, can you speak about what it is and why Samsung was enthusiastically joining as a partner?
On this, I think, Jack, we're totally aligned. The Extreme Tech Challenge is the world's largest startup competition for startups that are really trying to make an impact on the world's most, pressing challenges. If you think about what's going on in the world right now, things like a need for cleaner water, better food sources, financial inclusion, reduction of bias and discrimination, better education, better healthcare. The Extreme Tech Challenge was actually originally designed around the United Nations 17 Sustainable Goals for the Future. And we're really excited to say that we've got, just in the last couple of months, 800 global applicants to the Extreme Tech Challenge. It's a series of regional challenges that will actually all funnel up to the grand prize winner at Viva Tech, where it will be announced in Paris in June of next year. Anybody that would want to apply to this can learn more and actually make that application at extremetechchallenge.org. It turns out that Extreme Tech Challenge is actually a not-for-profit, and the steward is Samsung, along with partners like NXP, Cisco, ARM, even Ford, and a whole bunch of others in Silicon Valley and around the world. We're very proud to be a part of this because, as you mentioned, technology can be used for a variety of things, right? We're seeing some negativity in the news, but at the end of the day, most of us believe that at its core, technology can really make an impact, right? Just like the impact of VC. It can make an impact for good in the world. And I'll tell you, Jack, I was just reviewing some of the applicants, and I was reading about one that is using, back to our theme, or one of the themes here, data and AI, to actually predict when dictatorial forces in Syria are about to bomb civilian populations, right? So people can get this an alert on their mobile devices, and they can actually get to safety. I mean, what could be more tech for good, right? I don't think anybody would criticize that use case. It basically is saving lives. So we're very serious about this extreme tech challenge. The quality of the applicants has been unbelievable. We believe many of them can actually even be sustainable ongoing businesses, which would actually be one of the requirements for the finalists and ultimately the grand prize winner. And we look forward to anybody out there, reaching out to learn more or just submit an application.
Well, I'm thrilled to continue the promotion of that activity to the entrepreneurial community, but I also have to tell you, the more that you speak about it, the more that I'm quite enamored personally and professionally. So I'll follow up with you separately about how Impact Venture Capital can get involved in a more active way. Thanks for the details on that. I'm going to shift gears and ask you a couple of more sort of professional development and personal questions, if that's okay. I've got a room full here of incredibly accomplished CEOs that are involved in the Entrepreneurs Organization. And they get together, as you may know, this is a global organization that breaks up into chapters by city and then into forums with usually between 8 and 12 different accomplished CEOs that have met certain thresholds to be sort of classified as a successful business. And they get together and they spend 3 to 4 hours each month effectively talking about what's going on personally with family and professionally. And oftentimes there's an experience sharing element of learning from each other, not giving advice, but really kind of sharing experiences. In that regard, we're always thirsty for knowledge around sort of best practices and what different people do to sort of bring their A game to their day job. Is there something from a professional development standpoint that you find that you do on a regular basis that allows you to achieve at the level that you've achieved at, and that sort of keep you headed in a positive direction on behalf of Samsung and candidly on behalf of yourself?
Yeah, no, good question. I think a lot of us think about this sort of thing. Probably a few things. Number one, and none of it is really rocket science, and I know different things work for different people, but number one is I just try to, continue, no matter how busy I am, at the day job, on the side, on nights and weekends and things like that, I really try to keep up to speed on, what's going on in the tech industry. I'm a big fan of podcasting, so I probably listen to 3 or 4, maybe even more different podcasts. Most of them are tech or venture capital sort of directly related. But I've really kind of leveled up on, leadership and management sort of podcasting as well. I was actually recently just at a technology conference and at a big tech company, and they actually had some. It was really interesting. They had some New York Times bestseller authors on stage. And they were actually, the one guy that jumped up was actually a former Navy SEAL. And at first you're like, why is this Navy SEAL up on stage, talking about things at this tech conference? And it turns out that they had written a book called Extreme Ownership, and they talked a lot about leadership skills that were developed in the Navy SEAL units that actually, surprise, can actually be applied to business teams. And so that's one that I've really throttled up on. A related podcast to that, one of the Navy SEALs that formed the consulting group that wrote the book and services big tech companies and other Fortune 500 customers, his last name is Jocko, so he has Jocko Podcast. A lot of it is about military history and stuff like that, but it's relevant not only because of the leadership sort of things that he talks about, leadership and management, but I'll tell you, if you think you're having a bad day in the business world, you listen to a guy like Jocko talk about stuff that happened in, some battlefield where people are getting, let's just say horrible things are happening. Maybe your day isn't as bad, right? So it kind of puts things into perspective. So I'm learning about leadership, consistently in management, and then just, feeling better about where I am in life and at work when I know other people have it much worse than I do.
One last question for you. You may recall as part of my thesis project in the Kauffman Fellows Program, I did a lot of research on proactive living and strategic planning for life. And the idea was to set up and establish a set of routines that would optimize your ability to perform sort of not only at work, but you know, personally and with family, and sort of maybe manage your life in a bit of a more proactive way. Part of my thesis was that the morning was a critically important time, and having a consistent set of routines for launching your day, getting into the right mindset, getting in the right sort of physical state, all those things before you decided to take on the world's challenges was a key element of it. Have you found that there's any kind of morning routine? Is there something consistent as you wake up each day before you sort of, you know, see what the world has to offer you that day, challenges or opportunities? Is there something that you found that as a pattern or some kind of consistent routine that has served you well?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned this because one just sort of popped up, and I didn't realize I was actually doing it until you kind of alerted me to this question. So, you know, I'm a big coffee fan. You know, some say a coffee connoisseur or maybe a coffee snob. And you know, a lot of these big companies have these big giant coffee machines. They're automated, but maybe the quality's not so great. So I decided to start bringing in a French press. Just a little tiny one, you know, it's single serve, and I bring in my own coffee, you know, I grind it, and I do, you know, I do the little, 5 to 8 minute, almost like a ritual now every morning. And at first I thought, oh, I'm doing this because I like really good coffee. But it turns out that, you know, 5 to 8 minutes where I go into the kitchen area and I go through the same routine, I've developed this ritual, and I realized that, you know, I'm kind of like thinking about my day, sort of prioritizing, all while I'm developing, you know, this beautiful cup of coffee that I'm then going to down and, you know, get that sort of caffeine jolt so I can get going. So what I'm saying is, you know, thinking about it, and then I get that caffeine jolt, and then boom, then I can hit it. And I've been doing that consistently for a couple of months now, and it's sort of like it's a pleasant little ritual, you know. And you know, some people drink tea, some people do other drinks, but at the end of the day, it's almost like within the confines of the office, it's a little bit of alone time. I typically get in a little bit earlier than most people, not all people, but some. And so it's kind of quiet in the office, and I can just really focus, and then I can just get running and going for the rest of the day.
It sounds like a little time for meditation in a way. You have some other activity, but you're
yeah.
I do something similar, except mine's kind of meditation with pain. It's a morning jog. And, so that's how I balance it. Hey, thanks so much for the time today, JC. I really appreciate you allocating a little bit of your day. I definitely want to keep in touch and hear about, you know, new investments in the portfolio and other things that you're thinking about as we head into 2020. So I'll definitely recruit you back onto Impact TV in a few quarters and see how things are going. But thanks again for making time today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. My pleasure.